And the key point I want you to get out of this is that it was telling Saskatchewan that they were on the right track. They were doing the right things. They were doing strategic planning through partnerships and trying to make their decisions based on evidence. They were doing Aboriginal employee career development with Aboriginal employee career development officers. And they were doing a lot of Aboriginal awareness training. All of these other best practices, as they were called in the study, were being done in Saskatchewan. So that said that we were on the right track. Moving ahead to 2007, Human Resources and Skills Development Canada, HRSDC, commissioned Ian Peach, who at that point was with an institute that doesn't exist anymore here at U of R called Saskatchewan Institute of Public Policy. It's now merged in with the Graduate School of Public Policy. Anyhow, Ian Peach and his team was commissioned to review what Saskatchewan was doing with trying to increase Aboriginal representation in the health sector. And the key conclusions that they came to about the program and the initiative as a whole was that it did have a shared vision. Everybody seemed to understand that, but and a strategic framework. But the different key informants that they interviewed didn't necessarily share an understanding of the direction. In other words, they weren't quite sure exactly what the benchmarks were, how would we monitor progress, and how can we tell when we're doing a better job than we were a year ago. Those are the sort of things that people weren't clear about, but they did have a pretty clear understanding of what they were doing overall. That leadership was not just centralized in a few people, but it was widely shared, and it was a collaborative, working together kind of process rather than a autocratic top-down kind of thing. And the nature of the partnership was flexible enough so that people could actually feel like they were building an agenda together rather than having it imposed. So those are the sort of things that the Peach study found. The other key point about this is that I know from still being in the federal government at the time this came out, one of the reasons it was commissioned was that everybody was talking about the Saskatchewan approach. That whatever Saskatchewan was doing seemed like the best in the country. So that was one of the reasons the study was commissioned, was to say, well, what is Saskatchewan doing? What's working about it? What isn't working? And this was what the study found. Okay, briefly want to move ahead to our own research. Eber, Hampton, and I, with others, are involved in this Seeking Models of Aboriginal Health Human Resource project that's been going on now for 4 years. SAHO was a partner. Health Canada still is. And one of the things that we're trying to look into is to elaborate in a better way than has been done in the past in writing up for academic publication purposes exactly what is an Indigenous way of understanding Aboriginal health human resource issues. How is it distinct from the mainstream way of understanding Aboriginal HHR, as we say? And some of the findings that we've come to that are relevant for this discussion today is that you really have to be cautious and understand clearly what you're doing when you throw around this loaded word called partnership. It took us a long time in the research project to get our partnership right. You really have to work hard at constructing what we call an ethical space, one where an Indigenous worldview and Western worldviews are actually equal, that one isn't dominating the other. And that could be one of the reasons why these local partnerships related to the development of the partnerships in the health sector it wasn't always clear what the nature of the partnership was, whether it was, as the lady said from Ontario, you know, is it a coalition? Is it a network? I mean, it was fine to call it a partnership, but what does that mean? What is it? The other finding that we think is relevant for this discussion today is that there are in fact distinct Indigenous ways of thinking about and doing management of human resources that are holistic. They focus on good relations, as there's different Cree and Soto words for that, but that's the English equivalent, is good relations. And some of these are probably good practices that all managers can emulate. They're not necessarily just useful for Indigenous organizations, they could be good for everybody. So we think some of the research that we're working on now might be relevant for this when we try to put what we're doing with the SMART project, looking back at the work in building a representative workforce. We think some of this is connected. The last point I think is worth repeating here. A simplistic approach likely won't work. Aboriginal organizations themselves don't take a simplistic approach. So why should health or any other sector take a simplistic approach, which would say, go to school, get what you need to know, and then we'll hire you. If you take a holistic approach, then you recognize that a person is more than their resume. A person is more than just what they might have on their resume from being in college. They're a whole person. They're a family. They have a network of connections. They have a network of experiences in the community or elsewhere that are relevant for their effectiveness as an employee. So those need to be recognized and supported, and career pathing, among other strategies, was exactly that kind of strategy. So I have two big points of thumbs up and one that sort of, this is perhaps a little bit too Siskel and Ebert, but it's my way of being pluses and minuses. So to sum up, in general, the policy framework was based on what was working. Saskatchewan seemed to have the right idea. It was building relationships. It was maintaining partnerships at all levels. Plus, it seemed to be taking a long-term, holistic approach to Aboriginal employment development. It wasn't just leaving it out to the training sector to say, train those Indians, which is kind of where I think we are now. It actually had a strategy and there was initiatives involved. Plus, we could hold our heads up across the country because we were seen as having a set of national best practices. I'm not sure I want to do that now. So those are the pluses, mainly from the Peach study, but also from other sort of anecdotal things that we've heard over the last little while. There might have been some problems with benchmarks, and those are always a problem because you can't just let the numbers be your guide. There's a lot of qualitative success that goes on here, like how can you measure somebody's career path? They may be on a very good path for 5 or 10, 15 years, and they still count as one Aboriginal employee, you know? And that investment in that one person might have been worth thousands and thousands of dollars. So I appreciate that there are some issues with benchmarks, but government seems to need those. We seem to want to be able to point to numbers and say, yeah, we're doing some good things.